What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we will be looking at the game from the viral video of Magnus Carlsen slamming the table against Gukesh after losing to him. And we will, in this game, find out exactly what made him so angry. So let's get right into it. So Gukesh is with the white pieces and starts out with e4, we get e5, we get a Rui Lopez. This is all basic opening stuff. If you're wondering right here why white can't just take the knight on c6 and then win the pawn on e5, it's because of d5. And if you'll just notice the position, black has a lot of more development, especially since this rook will come in, the center's being attacked, and in general, black just has more initiative. So Gukesh just goes with theory and castles. And then we get some more basic developing moves. Bishop a4. We get this nice move by Magnus, h6, a prophylactic move, making sure that white is unable to develop to g5, where it could potentially have an annoying pin on this knight. And now we have rook to e1. We have b5, bishop to c2, bishop to b6, knight b d2. This is all theory, and all the players have already basically prepared this, and there's really no need to go in depth here. The whole point of knight to e7 here is to go to g6, where it will control valuable squares like f4, h4, and, just basically focusing the pieces to the king side, where, as you'll see later in the game, Magnus plays a lot around this section of the board. And so now we have a4 by Gukesh trying to break open the queen side. Rook b8, d4, and you'll see that Gukesh is actually playing really well. He's closing up. You see this bishop doesn't have much activity. Now we get knight to g6, as I explained, is the whole point of the maneuver. And now we get knight to f1. Knight to f1 is a move. It opens up this bishop. It also makes the queen see this d4 pawn and protect it more. There's also ideas of knight to h2, knight to g3. And again, on knight to g3, it could similarly control f5 and h5. However, there's also another move that Gukesh could have considered, which was a5, because after, say, something like bishop a7, and again, if he goes knight f1, c5, and then knight g3, here the black bishop is completely out of the game. It's been pushed back by our a5 pawn. We're controlling a lot of the dark squares, and after bishop to e3, white enjoys a lot of luxuries in the position, which black doesn't really have, just because his bishop's really passive. But, I mean, knight to f1, of course, is a good move. I can't hate on it. We get c5, knight to d3. Now we take on c4, and then b takes a4. Gukesh recaptures, and now we have bishop to b7. So you can see Magnus is lining up his bishops, and they play an important role in attacking the king. And now we have d5 by Gukesh, a really nice move, although the computer thinks that rook a3 was better, but I genuinely cannot explain that move to you. d5 essentially locks out this bishop. It has no play. And even though you might say that this bishop looks very powerful, you'll see in the next couple moves how Gukesh manages to blunt that bishop by playing bishop to e3, trading it off. He knows that this bishop is not that great, and this bishop is really good. So the best principle in any game is to trade off your worst piece for your opponent's best piece, and that's exactly what Gukesh does. Now, Magnus, of course, does not accept the trade, because that would simply be a little premature in this position. Bishop to c8 is a very good move, because, as you'll see later, this improves the bishop, because it was just completely blunted by these pawns, and honestly, it's better on this diagonal. And as you'll see later, bishop takes h3 is a very recurring theme in this game. So just pay close attention to that. And now we have b3, and Magnus now decides to take on e3 and play knight f4. Now he has very good control on the dark squares. His knight is super powerful, and bishop h3 is definitely a threat. So now we have bishop to c6, rook to b4. I mean, in this position, there are so many moves that you could play. You could play bishop takes h3. It's unnecessary, but the computer still likes it. You could play something like g6. You could play maybe h5. There's a lot of things you can do. Now, rook b4 is what Magnus chooses. Just put more pressure here. In general, it's a pretty good idea. And now we have queen to c2. Now we have this g6 move, which looks strange, but it's actually pretty good because, first of all, this king gets more room, and h4, h5 is, it's gonna kick out this knight on g3, and not to mention that g6 controls f5 and h5. So this knight is basically completely out of the game. Magnus uses amazing technique. I mean, he is the best player in the world. And now we have king to h1 by Gukesh, and you might say, why? The whole point is bishop takes h3, now knight takes h3 is not met with check, so the sacrifice isn't as powerful. So now we have bishop to a6. Magnus again puts this bishop on another diagonal. He knows that bishop takes h3 is no longer a threat, so why would you keep the bishop undeveloped on c8? So he moves it to this much nicer diagonal. Now we have queen to a2. Gukesh attacks this a5 pawn, and now we have bishop to d3. This does a lot of things. First of all, it adds pressure to the e4 pawn. It also disconnects the white rook on e3 from the b3 pawn. So say if white were to take on a5, then we could have rook takes b3, and here the computer evaluates this as nearly winning for black, just because there's so many ideas in the position, a lot of ideas for black, and simply put, white's pieces literally have no moves. This rook is kind of stuck here. This rook isn't doing anything, and I mean, this bishop controls no squares, literally no squares. It's attacking nothing, it's doing nothing. So that's why Gukesh chooses not to take on a5, instead plays knight to d2, protecting this b3 and e4 squares. But again, this is a passive move, and in general, you don't want to be passive against a player like Magnus Carlsen, but it's kind of hard to say anything. Now we get h5 by Magnus. He's going to drive this knight out of g3. He's going to completely destroy Gukesh on the king side. Now we get queen takes a5, and then we get h4, and now we get this clever idea by Gukesh, rook a4. The whole point is, you might think that black wins the knight here, but after f takes g3, this pawn attacks the knight, and if the knight moves, which is probably going to happen, then it will no longer be defending this bishop, and this is basically a draw. So we get rook to a4, and of course Magnus does not take, and says play rook to b8. He's protecting this rook, and on the next move, he goes king to g7. Now, king to g7 is a very weird move, but I think the whole idea is Magnus saw he could take the knight, and then after this, he could play knight to e2, and after here, there would be this little fork right here. However, there is rook to f3, and after knight takes, rook takes, black is up in exchange, but maybe Magnus thought king to g7, protecting this knight on f6 was the best way to go. Can't hate, it's definitely a good move. Now we get rook to a7 and rook to d4. The whole point is now Magnus is preparing to take, because after this, and the knight moves, this bishop is going to be protected by the rook. So now Gukesh plays this counterattack move, knight to f3. He's attacking the rook, and now Magnus chooses to chop the knight off on g3. We get f to g3 by Gukesh. If the knight were to take the rook, then there is takes on f2, rook f3, you queen, and here Magnus is up, what is it, a knight. So he would easily win this position. So Gukesh instead chooses to take on g3, and then we have knight takes h3. He's going to lose this knight anyway, because I mean, if you move this knight to a safe square, then your rook gets taken. So Magnus tries a desperado, just basically saying, okay, I'm going to take on h3, and if you take on d4, I'll take on here, and after rook takes g3, there's this nice little check. So then, at least I'll get a pawn in all of this mess, which is what Gukesh decides to do. And then we get bishop takes e4. This knight can't take because it's pinned to the king. king to h2, unpinning. And I mean, here the computer, you can't see the eval bar, but right now it is minus 4.3. This is literally completely winning for Magnus. Magnus against in any other position would win this game. And it's hard to explain how Magnus lost this game. So now we have rook to h1, basically saying, if you move this knight, rook to h1 is checkmate. So we get g4, creating some breathing room for the king. Now we get bishop takes d5. Magnus is just gobbling up the pawns. Knight to f4, you can see Magnus just expert endgame play. Magnus is known as an expert at endgames, and especially since in this endgame he is a pawn up, this should be an easy win for him. Now this is the critical move of the game. It's hard to believe that Magnus could lose in a position like this with passed pawns rampaging down the board, an extra pawn too. Not really an extra pawn, but these passed pawns are equal to that. All Magnus has to do is get his rook to safety, attack this king, push these pawns. I mean, Magnus being the endgame master should know this, but unfortunately, Magnus plays knight to e2 check, and this loses on the spot. And after Gukesh plays his next move, Magnus pretty much just slams the table. And I'd like to invite you to pause the video and try to solve this move for yourself and see what Gukesh was able to find and play. So it's a check, but you can see that Magnus is threatening to win this rook on f2, but Gukesh finds rook takes e2 and knight takes f8, and now Gukesh is up a whole entire knight in this endgame, and he manages to convert it. It's not easy because these two passed pawns, you still have to be careful, but with this h pawn just going to the end of the board, it's hard for anybody to be able to win this position as the black pieces. And we get check and then king f4. In this position, Magnus resigned simply because this e3 pawn will fall. There's no chance of protecting it. And then after that, knight is on e3. It'll control the d1 square. And then Gukesh will simply promote to a queen. So that is the game. And I think you can tell why Magnus got so angry. I mean, he was completely winning the whole game. I don't know, the last time Gukesh was even, better was probably on, move 10. Ever since that, Magnus just simply crushed him. And in the last couple moves of the game, Magnus made one mistake, and that led to him losing the entire thing. So, tell me in the comments, do you think this is a fair reaction, or do you think Magnus may have overreacted a bit? And as per usual, make sure to like and subscribe.